Sometimes life has a strange way of revealing hidden truths, especially when those truths are buried in the most unexpected places. David stood at the peak of success, a man whose life seemed to be the epitome of everything the world defined as achievement. Living in the heart of a bustling metropolis, he had it all: a luxurious penthouse apartment, sleek sports cars parked in his high-rise garage, and a company empire spanning across markets. But behind the immaculate suits and the confident stride was a man quietly haunted by the loss of a piece of his past, a part that wealth and status could never restore. He often found himself gazing out over the city skyline, his mind drifting to simpler times, back when life revolved around family dinners and shared dreams, before everything unraveled. David was a self-made millionaire, true, but no amount of money could fill the void left by the sudden disappearance of his younger brother, Elliot, many years ago. The Heirloom, a delicate, intricately designed pocket watch, was the only tangible connection to his broken family. It had belonged to their father, a man who always valued family over fortune. The pocket watch was more than just an object. It was a symbol of their lineage, a silent witness to the countless memories of their childhood. But then came the tragedy. One fateful day, amidst the chaos and confusion, the watch disappeared just before Elliot went missing. Its absence was a constant reminder of what was lost, the unity of a family shattered and scattered, never to be whole again. To David, the watch represented hope, a fleeting dream of reconciliation, a chance to mend the fractured pieces of his past. Yet, despite his wealth and influence, the Heirloom seemed forever out of reach, just like his brother. To the world, David appeared as a man who had it all: wealth, power, and prestige. He drove the finest cars, owned houses in every prime location, and his penthouse was filled with the latest luxuries money could buy. But behind the polished facade, he was emotionally detached, living each day like a transaction. His mind was sharp, his focus unrelenting. Everything he touched turned to gold in the business world. Yet every night, as he sank into his designer couch, he'd pull out an old faded photograph, a snapshot of him and Elliot as kids, smiling beside their father. It was his ritual, his secret moment of weakness, staring at the picture and whispering silently, "Where are you, little brother?" But success had its price, and in his relentless pursuit of wealth, David buried his longing under layers of busyness and distractions, hiding the one thing he craved most: closure. In another part of the city, a world away from David's penthouse, lived Jake. His modest apartment stood in stark contrast to the opulence of David's lifestyle. Jake was a low-income worker, a janitor in one of David's many companies. He spent his days scrubbing floors, fixing minor issues, and making sure everything looked pristine for people who never noticed him. But what he lacked in money, he made up for in character. Jake was known for his honesty, kindness, and unwavering dedication. He didn't have much: no fancy cars, no big houses, no market investments. Yet around his neck he wore a peculiar pocket watch. It was old, scratched, and worn, but it was his most valued possession. He couldn't explain why, but from the moment he found it at a charity event, he felt inexplicably connected to it, like it held a part of him that he couldn't quite grasp. One ordinary day, fate began to weave its unexpected threads. David, on a whim, decided to visit the headquarters of one of his companies. It wasn't something he did often, preferring to manage from his high-rise office downtown. But something drew him there, a vague, inexplicable urge. As he walked through the facility, nodding at employees and exchanging pleasantries, his gaze landed on a lone figure mopping the floors late into the evening. The man looked familiar somehow, though David couldn't place where he'd seen him before. It wasn't until Jake paused, pulling out the pocket watch to check the time, that David's world tilted. His breath caught as he recognized the intricate engravings, the unmistakable shape. Could it be? His heart raced as he stared, feeling as if he'd glimpsed a ghost from his past. A ghost in the form of a simple janitor, in a place he never thought to look. David's thoughts spun wildly. How could this be? That watch was unique, a family heirloom lost decades ago. What were the odds that a random worker in one of his companies would be in possession of it? Curiosity flared into something deeper, an obsession that threatened to consume him. He needed answers, but approaching the man too soon could scare him off, or worse, make him hide the watch forever. David decided to play it smart. He'd return, observe, and gather information. If that truly was the heirloom, then Jake, this unassuming janitor, was holding the key to David's most profound mystery. But more than that, if the watch had found its way to him, could it mean that Elliot wasn't lost after all? The thought lodged itself in David's mind like a thorn, painful and persistent. For the first time in years he felt something stir, a sliver of hope that he thought he'd long buried. David couldn't shake the image of Jake holding that pocket watch. It consumed his thoughts, turning every mundane task into an agonizing weight until he could return to the facility. He started showing up more frequently, sometimes under the pretense of overseeing operations, sometimes just wandering the halls aimlessly. Each time, his eyes sought out Jake, observing the man who seemed completely oblivious to his silent scrutiny. David noticed the way Jake carried himself, modest, humble, always putting in extra hours without complaint. He admired Jake's resilience, but the watch, it haunted him. Could it really be the same one? And if so, what did that mean? Was it possible that Jake somehow knew his brother Elliot? Or worse, did Jake unknowingly carry a piece of his family's shattered history around his neck? Days turned into weeks, and David's curiosity morphed into an obsession. He started digging discreetly into Jake's background, using his influence to pull records, ask questions, and piece together a picture of the janitor's life. What he found was strange and unsettling. Jake's past was full of gaps. No known family, no solid history before the age of 10, and a patchwork of jobs that led him to where he was now. The more David uncovered, the more questions arose. Why did a man with no clear lineage possess something so valuable? It didn't add up. Yet, every time he saw Jake pull out the watch to check the time, his heart would pound with that same nagging feeling, like a half-remembered dream that just wouldn't come into focus. Unable to keep his distance any longer, David began engaging Jake in casual conversations. He'd stop by during Jake's late shifts, pretending to be interested in the facility's maintenance or commenting on the weather. Their talks were awkward at first, David's authoritative demeanor clashing with Jake's humble, down-to-earth nature. But slowly, the tension eased, and they began chatting more freely. David found himself drawn to Jake's unassuming honesty, his straightforward view on life. He spoke of hard work, integrity, and the simple joys of living, things David hadn't thought about in years. But no matter how much they spoke, David's eyes always drifted to the watch, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, a silent taunt. He was running out of patience. He needed to know the truth. One evening, as the sun dipped below the city skyline, casting long shadows across the facility, David made his move. He approached Jake directly. No pretense, no casual conversation. "That watch," he said quietly, his gaze piercing. "Where did you get it?" Jake blinked, taken aback by the sudden intensity. He glanced down at the watch, his hand instinctively wrapping around it protectively. "Why do you want to know?" Jake's voice was wary, edged with suspicion. For a moment David hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But then the years of longing, of unanswered questions, pushed him forward. Because it looks exactly like one that belonged to my family, he confessed, his voice low, almost pleading. It's unique, one of a kind. Jake's posture stiffened, and he took a small step back, confusion clouding his features. I found this years ago, he stammered, at a charity event. No one claimed it, so I kept it. It's just a watch. I didn't know it was anything special. But David shook his head, the desperation in his eyes clear. No, it's not just a watch. It's a family heirloom. It disappeared when my brother did. The words hung in the air, heavy and charged. Jake looked down at the watch again, his mind racing. He had never thought much about it beyond its sentimental value. But now he felt a strange unease, like he was standing on the edge of something vast and unknowable. As Jake described the night he found the watch, David's heart pounded. Every detail, every word resonated with him. The small engravings, the unusual clasp, things only someone intimately familiar with the heirloom would know. David's throat tightened. This was it. This was the watch. But then, how had it ended up here with a man like Jake? And why did he feel this inexplicable pull towards him, as if Jake held more than just an object from his past, but a piece of his very soul? He had to be sure. He needed Jake to understand. Listen, David said, his voice raw with emotion. This watch, it's tied to a part of my life that I've been searching for decades. It's more than just metal and gears. It's family. Jake stared at him, wide-eyed, caught between disbelief and something deeper. I don't know what to say, he murmured, shaking his head. I've had it for years. It's always felt familiar, I guess. Like it was meant to be mine. But I never knew. His voice broke off as he looked back at David, seeing the pain and hope warring in the man's eyes. I don't know anything about a brother. I grew up an orphan. There's no family for me to remember. But David's gaze never wavered. Maybe you don't remember, he whispered. But what if you did? What if you're not who you think you are? The words sent a shockwave through Jake. He stepped back, shaking his head vehemently. No, that's impossible. I've been alone all my life. There's no long-lost brother, no family heirloom, nothing like that. But even as he denied it, a tiny spark flickered in his mind, a sliver of something, recognition almost. Was it possible? Could there be a past he'd forgotten, a history buried so deep that even he couldn't see it? David watched, his breath held, as Jake's expression shifted from confusion to uncertainty, then to something akin to fear. I can't be, Jake muttered, staring at the watch as if seeing it for the first time. But David stepped forward, his voice urgent. Please, he begged softly, just listen to me. Let me show you something. With trembling hands, David pulled out the old, worn photograph from his pocket. He held it out to Jake, his heart pounding so loudly he thought it would burst. Look, he whispered, this is us. That's me, and that's you. Jake took the picture slowly, staring at it in silence. There, frozen in time, was a young boy with David's eyes, holding the same watch in his tiny hands. Beside him, a child who looked eerily similar to Jake now. His mind reeled, his thoughts a chaotic swirl. Was this real? Could it be true? He glanced up at David, searching his face for answers, but all he saw was hope, desperate, aching hope. David's hands were trembling as he slid the photograph back into his pocket. The storm outside roared, lightning casting jagged shadows across his office walls, but the real storm was inside them, between the man desperate to reclaim his past and the one struggling to make sense of a life that suddenly felt like a lie. There's a way to know for sure, David murmured, his voice barely audible above the thunder. A DNA test. It's the only way. Jake stared at him, stunned, the photograph still clutched in his hand. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, to leave this strange, overwhelming situation behind. But a tiny, insistent voice whispered back, "What if it's true? What if the life he thought he knew was just a shadow of something bigger, something real?" I don't know," Jake stammered, his gaze darting from the photograph to the pocket watch, then back to David's face. "What if it's not true? What if I'm just some guy who found your family's lost watch by accident?" But David shook his head fiercely. "No, I feel it. I know it sounds crazy, but I feel it. The way you look, the way you talk, it's like I'm staring at a ghost. Please, Jake," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Let's just try. If I'm wrong, then I'll never bother you again." The raw desperation in David's eyes was unmistakable, and despite everything in Jake's mind screaming to resist, his heart was telling a different story. So, with a hesitant nod, Jake agreed. The test was simple, a quick swab, a form to fill out. But waiting for the results was agony. David couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything else. He paced his penthouse endlessly, staring out at the rain-slicked streets below, replaying every moment of his childhood with Elliot, wondering if fate was finally giving him a second chance. For Jake, it was worse. He felt like he was unraveling from the inside out, every memory he thought was solid now, crumbling under the weight of a possibility too terrifying to contemplate. If David was right, then everything, the loneliness, the struggle, the years of feeling like an outsider, had been for nothing. But if David was wrong... The email arrived at dawn, a single innocuous beep breaking the heavy silence. David's fingers shook as he opened it, his heart hammering against his ribs. For a moment, the screen blurred and he couldn't breathe. Then he saw it, the confirmation, a 99.9% match. Brothers. The word blazed in his mind, stunning him. He was right. After all these years, after all the pain and searching, Elliot was alive. Jake was Elliot. Tears blurred his vision, and he let out a shuddering breath, sinking to his knees as the reality of it crashed over him. His brother was back. Jake, on the other hand, felt as if the ground had been ripped out from under him. When David called and told him, the words didn't seem real. He was Elliot. He had a brother. He couldn't process it, couldn't reconcile the image of himself as an orphan with this new, impossible truth. "It's a mistake," he whispered, over and over, gripping the phone so hard his knuckles turned white. "There's no way, I'm not—" But David's voice was soft, filled with a quiet, unshakable certainty. "You are. You're my brother. You're Elliot." The name sounded foreign, strange, but a part of Jake's soul, no, Elliot's soul, recognized it. He sat there, shaking, feeling as if his entire life was slipping through his fingers like sand. When they met again, the air between them was electric, charged with years of longing and pain. David couldn't stop staring at Jake, his mind racing with memories, half-forgotten moments of laughter, of whispered secrets under the covers, of promises to never let go. "I can't believe it's you," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. But Jake, Elliot, looked away, his jaw tight. "I don't remember," he muttered, a bitter edge to his words. "I don't remember any of it." The pain in his voice was palpable, and David's heart clenched. "I know," he whispered, "but that doesn't change who you are." They argued, voices rising, emotions boiling over. Jake was furious, overwhelmed by the idea that his entire identity was a lie, that his past was a story written by someone else. "Why didn't you find me sooner?" he shouted, tears of frustration and anger glistening in his eyes. "Why now? Why me?" David flinched, guilt slicing through him like a blade. "I tried," he whispered hoarsely. "I looked for years, but I didn't know. I didn't know where to look." The truth of it, The helplessness, the endless searching, it poured out of him in a flood. "I thought I'd lost you forever." Jake's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. He felt like a child again, lost and scared, staring at the man who was supposed to be his brother. "I don't know who I am anymore," he murmured, his voice small, broken. David stepped forward, his own eyes wet. "You're my brother," he said fiercely. "You're Elliot, and I love you. We don't have to figure it out all at once, but please, don't walk away. Not again." The plea was raw, desperate, and it shattered the last of Jake's defenses. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached out, and David grabbed his hand, holding on as if he'd never let go. They stood there, the two of them, broken and bruised by life, but no longer alone. For the first time in decades, David felt whole. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice choked with tears. "I'm so sorry I couldn't find you sooner." But Jake shook his head, squeezing David's hand. "It's not your fault," he said softly, the bitterness fading. I want to try. I want to know who I am, who we are." David smiled through his tears, pulling his brother into a fierce, trembling hug. "We'll figure it out together," he promised. "I'm not letting you go, not ever." As they stood there, holding on to each other like lifelines, the storm outside finally began to ease, the first rays of dawn breaking through the clouds. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close to being okay. But it was a start, a fragile, precious beginning. And for now, that was enough. In the weeks that followed, David and Elliot, Jake, as he still preferred to be called, began the delicate process of piecing together the fragments of their shared past. They spent hours talking, sharing stories, and comparing memories. David would bring out old photographs, recounting moments from their childhood, but Jake's face would remain blank, the images sparking no recognition. It frustrated David, the way Elliot seemed so distant, as if the brother he'd longed for all these years was just beyond his reach. Yet he didn't push. He'd learned that much, at least, that healing took time. Instead, he focused on building something new, a relationship not based on what was lost, but on what they could still create together. Jake struggled, though. Each time he looked at David, he saw a stranger, a man who was supposed to be family, yet felt worlds apart from him. The wealth, the opulence, the power, everything about David's life seemed foreign, overwhelming. Jake found himself pulling back, retreating to the comfort of his old routines. He'd wake up at dawn, head to his tiny apartment, and spend his days working as he always had. But every time he walked into the building now, he felt eyes on him, whispers and glances from co-workers who'd noticed the sudden attention from the company's enigmatic owner. The truth was out. The janitor was the boss's long-lost brother. It made him feel exposed, uncomfortable, as if he didn't belong anywhere, not in David's world of luxury, nor in his own world of simplicity. David noticed, of course. He saw the way Jake stiffened around him, the way he flinched when someone mentioned his name. It broke his heart, but he understood. So instead of dragging Jake further into his own life, David did the unthinkable. He stepped into Jake's world. One morning, without warning, David showed up at the rundown neighborhood where Jake lived. He traded his tailored suit for jeans and a plain shirt, looking almost out of place as he followed Jake to the local soup kitchen where he volunteered. "What are you doing here?" Jake had asked, his voice sharp with surprise. But David just shrugged, offering a tentative smile. "I want to see what's important to you," he said simply. "I want to know you." They spent the day serving meals, David fumbling awkwardly with the ladle while Jake moved with practiced ease, greeting everyone by name. It was humbling for David, being in a place where his status meant nothing. The people here didn't care about his wealth or his cars or his sprawling house. They cared about the man beside him, the one who always showed up, rain or shine, to lend a hand. For the first time, David truly saw his brother, not as the missing piece of his past, but as a person in his own right. And it changed everything. He realized that he'd been so focused on finding Elliot that he'd forgotten to actually see Jake, the man who had lived a life of resilience and quiet strength. Slowly, a shift began. They found themselves spending more time together, not in boardrooms or fancy restaurants, but in Jake's world, at local diners, in small parks, or just walking through the neighborhood. They talked less about the past and more about the present, about who they were now. And as the walls between them crumbled, Jake began opening up, sharing bits and pieces of his life, the hardships, the loneliness, the small triumphs that no one else had ever noticed. He spoke of dreams he'd long buried, of the desire to do something meaningful with his life. "You're already doing it," David would say softly. "Every day you make a difference. I'm proud of you, Jake. More than you'll ever know." But it wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of it all, the expectations, the media attention, the pressure, felt unbearable. Jake would retreat, disappearing for hours, sometimes days, until David tracked him down, refusing to let him slip away again. "You're not alone," he'd say fiercely, grabbing Jake's shoulders, forcing him to meet his gaze. "Whatever it takes, we'll get through it, together." It was a promise he kept through every argument, every setback, every tear-filled night when Jake's frustration boiled over, and slowly, painfully, the distance between them began to close. Then came the day when David surprised Jake with an old, abandoned community center on the edge of town. "What's this?" Jake asked, staring at the crumbling building in confusion. David just smiled. "A project," he said softly, "for us, to rebuild. Not just this place, but our bond." They spent months working side by side, hammering nails, painting walls, transforming the dilapidated structure into something beautiful. It wasn't just about the building, it was about building them. Each stroke of paint, each plank of wood laid down, felt like a step closer to each other, a step towards a new kind of brotherhood. And the center wasn't just for them. It was for the community Jake loved, a place where people could come for support, for friendship, for a sense of belonging. It was there, amidst the laughter of children and the grateful smiles of those they helped, that Jake finally began to see himself, not as an outsider, but as someone who belonged. He watched as David, his brother, the millionaire, served food, organized donations, and laughed with the locals. He saw the way David's eyes softened, the way he listened, truly listened, to the people Jake had always considered his family. And something shifted in Jake's heart. For David, the transformation was just as profound. He realized that the wealth he'd spent his life chasing was nothing compared to the joy of building something that truly mattered. He watched Jake, no, Elliot, shine, saw him step into his own, and felt a sense of pride so deep it brought tears to his eyes. It was no longer about finding his brother. It was about being a brother. The community center became a symbol of their journey, one of pain and healing, of loss and rediscovery, of two men who had been separated by fate, but reunited by something stronger, family. When the center finally opened, it wasn't just a building. It was a testament to resilience, to love, to the power of second chances. They stood together, shoulder to shoulder, watching as people streamed in, filling the halls with life and laughter. "We did it," Jake murmured, a small, almost shy smile tugging at his lips. David turned, his own smile broad and genuine. "No, you did it," he said softly. "This place, it's you, Elliot. It's everything you are, strong, compassionate, unbreakable." Jake blinked, his throat tight with emotion. He didn't feel like Elliot yet, didn't know if he ever would. But for the first time, He didn't feel like an outsider either. He felt home. As the grand opening of the community center came to an end, David and Jake found themselves standing alone in the empty hall, the echoes of laughter and celebration still hanging in the air. The room was dimly lit now, the soft glow of the overhead lights casting a serene, almost magical ambiance. For the first time, they weren't just two men trying to bridge a gap. They were brothers, united by more than blood. The journey had been long, painful, but looking around at the center they'd built together, they felt something they hadn't experienced in years: peace. "This is just the beginning," David said quietly, his gaze drifting over the colorful murals on the walls, the carefully crafted rooms. "We can do so much more." Jake nodded slowly, his fingers absent-mindedly brushing over the pocket watch still hanging around his neck. The watch that had started it all, the heirloom that had been more than just a link to the past. It had been a key to the future. "Yeah," he murmured, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I think we can." The watch gleamed softly under the lights, a silent witness to the bond they'd fought so hard to reclaim. "You know," Jake said thoughtfully, turning the watch over in his hands, "it feels different now, like it's found its place." David's smile was soft, understanding. "Maybe because you found yours too." The days that followed were filled with planning and building. David and Jake threw themselves into their new mission, creating a foundation in their father's name, a legacy that would honor not just their past, but the family they were becoming. The David and Elliot Foundation, they decided to call it, using the names that were meant to be united. Their goal was simple: to help children like Jake, children who were lost, abandoned, without a sense of family or hope. They poured their time, energy, and money into the project, transforming empty lots and abandoned buildings into homes, schools, and centers that would give kids a chance to find the family they never had. But it wasn't just about the buildings or the money. It was about being there, about showing up. David, once obsessed with wealth and status, now spent his days visiting the children, talking to them, sharing stories about his own struggles. He told them about his mistakes, his regrets, and his dreams. And Jake, Elliot, he was the heart of it all. He knew what it was like to feel forgotten, to feel like you didn't matter. He became a mentor, a guide, someone the kids could look up to. They saw themselves in him, in his quiet strength and resilience, in the way he never gave up, no matter how tough life got. The heirloom, the watch that had sparked their reunion, found a new home too. Instead of keeping it tucked away, a private memento of their pain, David and Jake decided to display it in the very first center they built together. It sat in a small glass case, surrounded by pictures of them as children and as adults, a testament to their journey. "Family is found," read the inscription below in elegant script. It became more than just a decoration. It was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even the most broken families could find a way back to each other. People from all over came to see it, drawn by the story of the brothers who'd overcome the odds, who'd turned their pain into something beautiful. And it wasn't just about the two of them anymore. Their story spread, inspiring others to reach out, to rebuild, to reconnect. People began donating, volunteering, wanting to be a part of the change. The foundation grew, expanding beyond the city, reaching out to other communities, other broken families. Each new project, each new center, was a tribute to the legacy their father had tried to build, a legacy that David had nearly lost in his quest for wealth, and that Jake had unknowingly preserved through his integrity and resilience. Together, they were creating something that no amount of money could buy, a place where anyone, no matter how lost, could find a family. But the most profound change was within themselves. David, who had once measured his worth by the size of his bank account, now found joy in the simplest moments. Watching Jake joke with the kids, seeing their smiles, knowing that his wealth was finally being used for something meaningful. And Jake, who had spent so long believing he was alone, finally felt what it was like to belong. It wasn't about fitting into David's world, or even about reclaiming the identity of Elliot. It was about standing side by side as equals, as brothers, building a future they could both be proud of. One evening, as they sat together outside the main orphanage they'd built, the stars twinkling overhead, David turned to Jake, his expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think maybe this was how it was supposed to be?" he asked quietly. Jake frowned, glancing at him curiously. "What do you mean?" David shrugged, a wry smile playing on his lips. "I mean, if we hadn't been separated, if we'd grown up together, gone down the same path, would we have ended up here, doing this?" Jake was silent for a long moment, considering. "Maybe not," he admitted finally. "But that doesn't matter, does it? What matters is, we're here now." David nodded slowly, his gaze drifting up to the sky. "Yeah," he murmured softly, "we're here now." They sat in silence, the air between them peaceful, content. There was still so much to learn, so much to build. But for the first time, neither of them felt the need to rush. They had time. They had each other, and that was enough. As they sat there, shoulders touching, watching the stars, the watch between them gleamed softly in the moonlight, a reminder of everything they'd lost and everything they'd found. It wasn't just a story of a comeback or a drama of suffering and hope. It was a story of family, of love, of two men who'd turned a shattered past into a future full of promise. David glanced at Jake, a small, mischievous smile tugging at his lips. "So, think you'll ever get used to being called Elliot?" Jake snorted, rolling his eyes. "Not in a million years," he shot back. But his smile was genuine, warm. "But I think I could get used to being your brother." David's grin widened, his heart swelling with joy. "Good," he murmured, leaning back and closing his eyes. "Because that's never going to change." They stayed like that for a long time, just two brothers sharing a quiet moment, the heirloom gleaming between them, a symbol of the journey that had brought them together and the bond that would never break again. What would you do if someone you thought was lost forever suddenly reappeared in your life? Would you risk everything to reconnect with them, even if it meant uncovering painful truths? This story is a powerful reminder that some bonds can't be broken, no matter how much time or distance comes between them. But what happens when your family isn't what you expected? Do you embrace the past or walk away from it? Share your thoughts below, and let's talk about what family truly means. And hey, if you enjoy these kinds of heartwarming, inspiring stories, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on the next one.